Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Today we are breaking down the Crimson Lion Games Commander Challenge 9, A Twist in Time. This was a super sweet tournament that I got invited out to a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned a few times in the most recent videos on this channel. It was a really cool tournament, ended up being 66 players and all, with a crazy amount of prizes for the top results of this tournament. It ended up being a really cool experience. It was also in Anime Texas North, which was a really interesting experience. It was, I've never been to a cEDH tournament within a larger convention before, but it was really cool. And so this is a Texas-based game store, and they actually apparently do these events every single month, not to the scale of the prizing of these ones, but they're also looking to do this event again next year. So it was a pretty cool event. One thing to note before we break down the top 16 was they had a little bit of a different prize structure. So they only awarded 2 points for getting a bye in this tournament as opposed to the normal just full match win amount, which would be 5 points. And then also they awarded points for kills remaining in the match. So this was a little bit different, and originally I was pretty critical of this idea, but it brought up some interesting stuff that I think we'll be able to talk about throughout the tournament. Basically, if you eliminated a player during the match, despite if you were the person that won the game, you would get a point for that. So there was always a pool of 4 points to be earned by eliminating each player, right? So if you eliminated everybody at once, you'd get the normal 5 points, right? But if you, per se, took out one of the players during the match, you would get a point for that, and then the remaining points would go to the last player. So it was pretty interesting, and that was definitely something that messed with the Swiss a little bit, in the fact that you couldn't feel comfortable just drawing into the top 16 because you didn't know if somebody who had only gotten 1 or 2 wins also had eliminated 2 players during the course of the tournament, which was really cool. I think it added a certain layer to it. I wouldn't go with the specific eliminating of players as a way to really encourage people not drawing in the future, just because it also encourages people not playing to the win but playing to eliminate players, which could be a little bit different and cause people to take game actions that actually take them farther away from winning the game. That being said, it was a pretty cool tournament, and that rule didn't come into effect too often during the tournament. The other notable thing about this, and probably the format of this video, is that I was able to win this tournament and bring home a Timetwister, but we'll talk about that as we move forward. Before we jump into this top 16, remember to like and subscribe while you're here on YouTube. It helps out the channel a ton, and it's free. If you're feeling extra generous, go check out patreon.com/comedianmtg, and we're going to be talking about coaching in a later part of this video. First, we have Sterling Sellers here with this Kinnan list. This is a pretty sweet Kinnan deck. This Kinnan list is not doing anything too crazy, but it definitely has some interesting inclusions here. We have both Stonework Pack Beast, and we have the inclusion of the brand new Agatha Soul Cauldron, but we do not have the classic Mirage Mirror in this list. Nowhere in this 3-mana artifacts do we have Mirage Mirror, and it's interesting that they chose to go with these 2 inclusions. Obviously, Agatha Soul Cauldron is a very powerful card with a lot of implications, but basically when you include this package and don't include the shared summons package, you basically lose a 1-card win condition with Kinnan, right? The ability to go shared summons for Trophy Mage and your clone effects. So that's pretty interesting to note about this list. It has 2 of the more atypical infinite mana channelers in Stonework Pack Beast and the Soul Cauldron. Soul Cauldron, obviously a more popular one, but Pack Beast is one that I've liked for a long time, but can never find the slot for in the deck. So it's been pretty interesting to see that in this list here. Another one of the less typically played cards for Kinnan would be Training Grounds. A lot of people have sort of moved away from Training Grounds, and it's still not one that I'm a huge fan of. I think if you want to be creating more mana that puts you towards your win, things like that, that's awesome, but I think over investing in Kinnan's activated ability is a trap that a lot of newer players fall into. So I'm kind of interested to see it in this version of the list. On top of that, we also have Dress Down, which is definitely not often seen in Kinnan decks. I feel like with cards like Void Winnower and stuff like that, you don't usually want to be shutting down your own activated abilities of creatures, but also it's a card that can be used very effective defensively, can shut down a Thassa's Oracle, a Dockside, all of those things. So Dress Down's definitely very strong, very powerful, just, not exactly the card that I often see in these lists. It's also running 28 lands, which is not a ton, but definitely more than most Kinnan decks. I see many on 27 and 26. I feel like me being on 27 is usually the higher end of the spectrum, so seeing a 28 lander there is pretty interesting. We also have Thada Adel Acquisitor in the 99. This card has been talked about a lot more lately. I think all of the hype around the One Ring has really made this card very, very popular, which is really fun funny because I was not playing the One Ring in my list this weekend. I think a lot of people thought I would be, but I replaced it with Talion instead, which is pretty entertaining. But Thada Adel has been, just basically being played more and more by people, just like stealing Mana Crypt, and then going and taking a One Ring. Maybe not Mana Crypt per se, but that was the play pattern people were speaking about quite a lot, which is really funny because, with 2 Mana Crypts or 1 Mana Crypt and a One Ring, the damage starts to add up a considerable amount. So I don't know how much I really feel about cutting my life total that frequently with these archetype. All in all, pretty sweet Kinnan list. Also, if you hear my voice a little off of this episode, I am currently battling some sickness, so forgive me. But we have Joshua Couch here with Rograkh. It's a pretty classic Rograkh list. We go down all the way down here to 26 lands in Rograkh, which is quite a respectable amount, much more than the 24 average lands we're seeing in most Rograkh decks nowadays. This was a no proxy tournament, so you will notice that there is no Timetwister here in the sorceries that is normally played in this archetype, and I'm assuming that it's just a budget consideration. It's a pretty expensive card, and having to have one in paper is quite a lot, and one of the reasons people fought so hard in this tournament. Rending Volley, really interesting inclusion in this deck. It's not one I usually see in Rograkh lists, but I'm assuming it's for removing Dranniths and other problematic creatures such as that. Born Upon the Wind was a card that I saw do a lot of work this weekend, not in Rograkh specifically. Actually didn't even know there was a Rograkh deck at this tournament, but Born Upon the Wind I saw do some pretty crazy stuff in one of the other blue farm decks that was playing this weekend, and really impressed. There was some crazy stuff going on, and we'll definitely be talking about those a little bit later. Apart from that, not too many crazy things, just pretty classic Rograkh, trying to go fast, trying to end the game real quick. We have Tanner Combe here with Kirik, Son of Yawgmoth. Now, Tanner is a well-known player of this deck. It's something that they are just kind of known for playing, especially within that local Texas scene. So it wasn't surprising to see Tanner do well in this tournament and do well with this list. We actually played in the Swiss and both in the top 16. And, I think our pod respected Kirik quite a lot, but, they made top 16 from doing well with this list for sure. A lot of very powerful Kirik stuff here. A lot of the times you're trying to go for the Horling Broodlord lines that they're talking about a lot, trying to loop Grey Merchant of Asphodel repeatedly, and then using things like Sheoldred to be able to gain a bunch of life back that they lost, especially when it comes to cards like Peer into the Abyss. Kirik is just super explosive, a deck that you really have to respect, or else it will start to do a lot of damage to the table, and it is a deck that can get out of hand really quickly. It's very quick and very powerful, very explosive. If you know how to disrupt it by taking out the graveyard and stuff like that, then the deck becomes a lot easier to handle. I know in our semifinals match I was able to take the deck basically out of commission because I was able to get a turn 1 opposition agent down, and they had a very tutor heavy hand. But if you're not respecting the deck like that, it can get really out of hand, and luckily I played with a bunch of pilots who are also willing to respect the deck for sure. Jacob Law here with Najeela the Blade Blossom. This is a pretty classic Najeela deck. This is the Najeela we've come to know and love over the past few months. The idea is, we're talking about Underworld Breach Najeela, talking about Ad Nauseum. It's the Turbo Naz baby combined with these 1-card win conditions of Grim Hireling, Derevi, etc. Once again, paying off huge for having Samet and Orcish Bowmasters I like in this list because according to a lot of the people who play Najeela quite often, Bowmasters is really hard for the deck to break through. So having your own Bowmasters to snipe your opponent's Bowmasters is kind of the thing you gotta do, unfortunately, when you play this list. Love the inclusion of Grim Hireling there to take out your opponent's creatures and also be able to present a win con, and the rest of the deck is clean, efficient, low to the ground Najeela. Not too many crazy spicy options here in this list, just a lot of really good powerful cards and the ability to turn the win on from there. Crazy to see a 12 artifact Najeela list running Mox Opal. That to me is just kind of insane, but the list is doing its thing for sure. This was one of the most unique lists I saw from this tournament. Tiger Davila here with Emry, Lurker of the Loch, made top 16 with this deck. It's pretty sick. I played against it during the Swiss, and our match Tiger was unfortunately going 4th, so they didn't really get to interact with the table a whole ton. I know they were pretty proactively using Tribute Mage to go and tutor out Mesmeric Orb to be able to start milling people and obviously turn Emry online to start, doing the Emry thing. Kind of surprised because Emry is a card that folds to basically most stacks. Like it folds to Drannith Magistrate, it folds to Grafdigger's Cage, it folds to a lot of different stuff, and it's just kind of surprising to see it do so well. But Tiger was able to take this really cool list and be able to make it all the way to the top 16 with it. Aetherflux Reservoir being a big payoff. Kind of surprised to see Isochron Scepter because you don't really have a payoff in the command zone, but it does allow you to use Emry to recast things from your graveyard infinitely and untap her repeatedly. Notice there's also, there is Mirror and Spy in here. Okay, so to be able to go off with that combo, but seems to be the only other untapper. We have Fate Stitcher in here, which is a one-time untapper, I guess, but that's pretty interesting. I've never really seen that with that. And then we have some Shimmer lines here with Liberator and Shimmer Mirror, and I'm wondering how often those paid off for this archetype. Definitely really interesting to see those, and noting that the, you know, these flash archetypes, because of these Liberators and Shimmer Mirrors and Skittering Cicadas, it's, you know, happening more and more, and I'm really interested to see if this is going to continue to be a thing where these flash artifact strategies are going to keep showing up and performing well. Super congratulations to Tiger for making top 16 with this deck. It is pretty spicy, and there's a lot of super interesting cards in here. Like a Null, I've literally never seen it in the cEDH deck. Essence Scatter, same thing. So a lot of super cool stuff, a lot of really atypical pieces, and turns out to be a pretty powerful deck. We have Alessandro Sebastian with Blue Farm here. This is a pretty standard Blue Farm. I like the addition of Talion, Kindly Lord. I did end up swapping that into my deck for this week as well. Talion has just been super solid in the current meta. This one's running the One Ring as well as Talion and Remora and Rhystic Study. So a lot of card advantage engines in this deck. Esper Sentinel on top of it and your commanders. I know when I was looking for cuts for this list, I was choosing between Talion and the One Ring, and I chose Talion, but our player here really just going for all of the copies of him. Mnemonic Betrayal, definitely a card that saw a decent amount of this weekend, and it was like really good when there was a lot of blue farm decks in the pod, and when there wasn't a lot of blue farm decks in the pod, Mnemonic Betrayal kind of did nothing. So, you know, my feelings on that deck, this card are, you know, kind of continuing to be the same, where like in certain archetypes it's super powerful, and against certain archetypes it's super powerful, but not particularly in other matchups, especially, and I'm noticing in this list, there is no wheel or anything like that from this deck, so you can't even really artificially fill your opponent's graveyards before using the Mnemonic Betrayal yourself. Apart from that, not too many crazy spicy pieces here in this blue farm list. It's pretty standard blue farm doing its thing, 28 lands, all that stuff. We have a unique Thrasios pairing here with Jessica Thrasios by David Anderson. This is a pretty sick infinite mana list. This list is definitely like very focused on making sure its infinite mana combos go off. So we have, okay, I was looking down here for a free wheel, but there's just Training Grounds here and the classic like advantage Thrasios style card advantage stuff. But we have Cloudstone Curio here for Dockside combos. We have Baron here for Dockside combos. We have Teamer Sabretooth here for Dockside combos. We have Deadeye Navigator here for Dockside combos. So 4 separate ways to go infinite with Dockside. We have Kinnan here with, I assume, a Basalt Monolith. Yep, over here in the artifacts. Defense Grid, interesting tempo piece for this more explosive teamer option. And then we have Dualcaster Twin Flame on top of that as well, which is not really commonly found in a lot of these Thrasio style decks. And also Hullbreaker Horde to make infinite mana on top of all of the things we mentioned before. So this list definitely very proactive. I like the inclusion of both Dosan and also including Defense Grid in here. Really both separate ways to be like, hey, I'm winning the game this turn. This deck is definitely very solid at being able to do that thing. I'm noticing these Thrasios decks moving away from a lot of the more consistent mana dorks and into this sort of artifact acceleration package, trying to push them just a little bit faster to keep up with the metagame, which is, I think, pretty necessary for right now. We have Aaron O'Hanlon here with Talion the Kindly Lord. This deck I played against in the Swiss and watched play in the top 16 and a couple other matchups throughout the day. Aaron pilots this deck extremely well, and it was really cool to see him play it. He just, yeah, played extremely well, extremely respectful of all the other players in the game, and just something I really enjoyed watching playing this deck. But yeah, this is Talion, just the Corda blue-black control Talion. Kind of very surprised to see Urtai in here. It's not a card I would have expected to see in a Talion list, but you know, definitely there for the flash tempo pieces. But yeah, definitely a peculiar choice. I don't even really like it in CC where it like has a lot more benefits, so a little shocked by that option. I like seeing Notion Thief on top of Bowmasters in this deck, really paying off from your opponents trying to wheel. We're not playing any wheels ourselves in this list, but definitely doing a lot of the control pieces here. Labman and Thassa's Oracle, you know, Labman's actually in some ways with Talion a better win condition, and when I played against Aaron in the Swiss, he tried to, actually had Talion on the board, stuck Labman, and I was like, hey guys, the first 2 mana spell we cast is probably going to get hit with a Demonic Consultation or a Tainted Pact, so that he can go and win the game. game, and literally the first 2-mana spell that was cast literally triggered this Talion, and he put a demonic consultation on the stack in response to it. Luckily, we were able to fight it off and not lose the game at that point, but it's a pretty cool play pattern and definitely cool with Talion in the command zone. We see another Thada Adel in the 99. A lot of the stuff we were talking about with our list earlier. This card seems to be more and more popular as time goes on. I love seeing Sheoldred in the 99 of Talion lists, and I know one of the stranger lack of inclusions in this deck is no Bloodchief Ascension. And Aaron sort of like he like mentioned it in passing when we were talking about this deck during the tournament, but I didn't really get the full reason for not including it. I think it's really strong in a lot of these Talion lists, and probably one of the best win cons in the deck, but he seemed to, I believe, think he didn't really need it. You know, Talion, one of the best parts about this deck is that you can break parity on some of these classic stacks pieces like Curse Totem, Weathered Runestone, Grafdigger's Cage, things like that, while also being able to play this crazy control role. Definitely some more interesting interaction pieces here too, like C Double, which is definitely not a card I expected to see any of, not even to mention double. But we have Tail's End too, counter and counter abilities, counter things in the stack. It's pretty cool stuff. And Suspend, which I definitely think has been a slept on removal spell for the format right now. Yeah, but this deck's pretty sick, and congrats to Aaron for playing this deck really well, and especially when we were playing in this tournament, definitely showed some pretty sick play patterns. Shane Wilson here with Mardu Dargo. This is the classic turbo Mardu Dargo stuff that we're used to. We're rocking these, let's see how low we're, yeah, 24 land Mardu Dargo. This is a very explosive list. For those who haven't seen it, you're trying to use either like Burnt Offering, Sacrifice, or Obnix List the Adversary, or Ruthless Technomancer to really abuse the fact that you have Dargo in the command zone. If you get Ruthless Technomancer, Dargo, and a clone like Cursed Mirror, you can actually do an infinite recursion loop with that, which is pretty sick. You can also just do crazy explosive Dargo stuff by casting Burnt Offering or Sacrifice and just turning that into a Peer into the Abyss, turning it into an Adnaz. This list is on Adnaz, Bolsa Citadel, and Peer into the Abyss, so it's definitely trying to go very, very fast. It's a quick, explosive list. It's probably one of the most explosive Dargo lists, one of the most explosive Tymna lists that are out there too. You know, you got it's got all like the explosive Dargo stuff, plus you get access to Grand Abolisher and Ranger Captain and all of these cards that are just kind of busted in the format right now. And you're trying to go fast. It is very quick. It's trying to add nods out quickly, and then, you know, also has alternate dimension lines with Underworld Breach and stuff like that. It's a pretty cool deck. So congrats to our pilot here. Definitely the Dargo list one of the Dargo lists I'm most interested in. I think Mardu Dargo is kind of underexplored in general. I think it's pretty sweet. We have Malcolm Vial here from Donald Green. This is a pretty sweet Malcolm Vial list, playing some kind of off the beaten path cards in the list. We have Displacer Kitten lines with, from what I can tell, no real way to go infinite with them. I know like there's some stuff you can do with like Imperial Recruiter, but nothing too crazy. We have Deadeye Navigator in here to flicker stuff. Not really sure what all the flicker synergy is here for. I guess a lot of it is like Dockside, Imp Recruiter, and Bowmasters, but definitely some crazier inclusions here in this list. I know one of the things to call out here is like they're not even on Mystic Remora, which I thought was a rather peculiar choice, because that card's pretty uncuttable in my opinion. But this list is definitely playing some kind of crazy off the wall stuff. We got Meat Hook Massacre as well, Necromancy. They are playing Entomb. Yeah, so like there's definitely some entombing, hoarding Broodlord and going for Broodlord, but no Saw in Half, and they're on Ad Nauseam too. Baleful Mastery. Yeah, just a lot of like really atypical cards in this list. I'm kind of curious as to like what the line is with Broodlord that you can go get to win the game that turn. Also Hostage Taker, which is a card that, you know, I think saw play in Standard, but not really any play in cEDH whatsoever, which is pretty cool. And I'm wondering if that has to do something with these Kitten Displacer lines here, but definitely an off the wall list. You know, playing also like Arcane Denial, full Counterspell and Negate, Narcissus Reversal, stuff like that. Definitely some unique choices for this deck, and some that most people are not ready for this list. So pretty sweet. Michael Tells here with this not Dawnwaker Thrasios list, but sort of like an evolution of Dawnwaker Thrasios. It's a really cool list, and Michael and I talked a decent amount about the tournament and this deck. So Michael was also in my semifinals match, and I had to ad nauseam down to 3 life in this tournament, and I had to win a Mana Crypt roll to be able to win. So there was literally a 50-50 chance that Michael won this game or I won this game, and luckily I survived my Mana Crypt flip and did not lose the game. But Michael was playing really, really well and playing this really cool Dawnwaker variant. If you notice, like only 2 mana dorks in the list and, you know, running devoted druid lines still, which is something that I've started to try and move away from in my Dawnwaker variant, although the primer still has that. Definitely more artifacts than my current list, not by a huge amount. Michael's not on Springleaf Drum, which I'm currently on, but they are on the Wandering and things like that. He's also on the Breach packages, so playing Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, Intuition, and Savine's Reclamation, which I think the format is at the point now where we may need to start moving back towards Breach with Dawnwaker. For a long time, it wasn't worth the sort of horror card quality, but the format's definitely picking up pace, and I think, you know, Dawnwaker definitely has to make some adjustments going forward to kind of match where the format's at. But yeah, it was really cool being able to talk with Michael about this deck, because it's clearly a deck we both enjoy quite a lot, and seeing the work that he's put in on his version of it was pretty sick. Playing Blasphemous Act in his version, which he was telling me about in the mid-tournament, and it wasn't one that spoke to me personally, especially for this deck, which I feel like every time the board gets wiped, we're like set back a decent amount. But obviously with the much fewer mana dorks that he's playing in this version, it makes a little bit more sense for sure. But it's a pretty cool list, and definitely excited and happy to talk with Michael more about this deck as it moves forward, because I really liked a lot of the stuff they had to say about the list and a lot of the innovations that they did for this tournament and their variant on this list. Michael House here with Dihada. This Dihada deck was tearing it up. You may know Michael as a House over on the Nexus and some other places. I believe he's a sensei over there. But this is the pretty cool turbo Dihada list that we've been seeing every once in a while, but not like that consistently. Dihada has been tearing it up as of late. You know, a little bit of the Mardu summer mentality has been talked about a good amount, but it's been like on and off as to whether it's actually like being played as much. You know, a lot of people are saying just like switch over to Rograkh and it's a better version of this deck, but Michael playing this Dihada list to a top 16 and definitely had the best record of the people who did not make the top 4 in the Swiss. One thing that I did like about this tournament that I really want to promote while we're here is that this tournament did an interesting prize structure where they incentivized people to continue playing in the Swiss by making it so that players in the top 16 got prizing due to how they placed in the Swiss. So, for example, it didn't really matter if you won the whole tournament, but players 2, 3, and 4 got different level of prizing. Players 5 through 16 got different levels of prizing. So, for example, if you ended the Swiss in 5th place, right, and you made the top 16, you would get a different prize than someone who made the top 16 in 16th place, right? Which I think is really interesting, because it sort of discourages this like, well, I'm gonna get 2 wins and then draw into oblivion mentality, right? It like encourages people to continue playing to boost their records, because now people aren't going to try and draw in, they're going to try and get those wins so that they can, you know, if they make top 16 or if they make top 4, they're getting the best possible prizing structures, which I really, really liked. You know, and I don't know if that's like exactly the solution, but whatever ways we can sort of have in these tournaments going forward to discourage people just literally drawing into the top 16 after getting like 2 wins and stuff like that, I think would help a ton. And I think it will just like be better for the scene in general and healthier for the scene in general. Luckily, because of the, you know, points counting for kills and things like that, and the things I talked about, there was literally no one intentionally drawing in this tournament. I did not hear of a single intentional draw, so I thought that was pretty sweet. I think there was like maybe 1 or 2, but that was like the players who had like 3 or 4 wins, but they were like very clearly locked in right at the top table. So it's been pretty sweet to hear that system, whether it's like the perfect way to do it or not, was able to discourage this thing where people just draw into oblivion, which is just not good for the format in general. It's not great to be like, oh well, you've won twice, now you're going to sit out for 3 rounds. It's the worst experience. That all being said, this Dihada list is pretty sick. It's doing a lot of the pretty classic Dihada stuff. You know, you're going for Bolus to Citadel lines, going to Ad Nauseam lines, but more specifically, your commander and the card Flicker are one of the easiest ways to get a very early Underworld Breach going in the command zone. So it's a pretty explosive deck, definitely trying to go very, very fast. Dihada has this ability to just replace itself insanely quickly. It comes down and gives you treasures basically equal to its mana value if you don't take any of those cards, which a lot of the times you're not going to do. So it's pretty sweet. Before we break down our top 4, I want to remind you that we do cEDH coaching here on the channel. If you're interested in cEDH coaching, feel free to hit me up at comedianmtg@gmail.com. Apart from that email, you can also hit me up on Twitter or in Discord. Any of those places, you can just shoot me a DM and go over those things. I have 2 types of coaching right now, one being one-on-one coaching, where I sit down a Discord call with people and go over things they want to look at, like deck lists, things like that. Or, you know, my gameplay coaching, which is I will do 2 hours of gameplay with people. We'll stop between rounds, take breaks, talk about conversations about the games, and then they can also have a one-on-one session to talk about that in an individual capacity for a reduced rate. So if you're interested in those coaching things at all, feel free to hit me up once again at comedianmtg@gmail.com or Discord or Twitter, all of which are going to be in the description down below in this video. Our fourth place, we have Rocco Cabredicator. I feel bad because this deck, they were by Sean Lewis. They got kind of screwed in the top 4 where they were in last seat and they mulled to 4, so they didn't really get to do a ton. But the deck's pretty sick. It's a pretty classic Rocco list. You have your lines here with Greater Gargadon, being able to sacrifice your Arena Rector. You have your Kiki-Jiki lines either with Village Bellringer or Felidar Guardian, things like that. You also have your Food Chain Squee combinations here. Food Chain being able to exile Squee, make infinite mana, and cast your deck with Rocco. You can also do Temur Sabertooth and Dockside lines. You also have Emil plus Dockside. This one going for a few of these like tempo-y stacks pieces, playing Archon and Collector Oof, but not going full stacks like I know a lot of other lists have thought about. This one's also playing Walking Ballista, which I find pretty interesting. It's not the normal inclusion, especially because if Rocco fetches a Walking Ballista out of your yard, it just goes right to the graveyard. But I guess if you're at that point, you can just like get an Eternal Witness to get it back into your hand. But I find that inclusion pretty interesting in general. Yeah, and Rocco's like a pretty sick deck. It's is doing its thing. You can either go up these Birthing Pod lines, or get the Vivian Planeswalker like we talked about with Arena Rector before, be able to sacrifice Rocco, go grab Felidar, blink that again, go get Karmic Guide, Kiki-Jiki, and then go infinite with those. So pretty classic streamlined Rocco list. Rocco has been doing not as well lately. It's been pretty badly hated out of the format, so for it to get all the way to the top 4 here is pretty sick. Congrats to Sean on this performance. All right, so here's the dealio. The rest of the top 3, we were all playing Blue Farm. I say we because I was able to actually win this tournament, and I, as once again by the name of this video, was able to go home with a Timetwister as the first place prize, which was awesome and amazing, and something I am so grateful for being able to come down to this tournament, for being able to experience a meta that I don't usually get to down in Texas. And super huge shout out to the Crimson Lion Games folks, and I'm very excited to see what they put on for next year's tournament. And once again, if you're in that Texas area or if you're anywhere near them, go check them out because the people who run the store are super nice and kind and pretty awesome to work with. So that being said, let's talk about these Blue Farm lists. So we have Evan Pierce here in 3rd, also known as Freedom Waffle. So if you are familiar with Freedom Waffle at all, mostly known for playing Thrasios Dargo. We were actually chatting early on in the tournament, and we were like, he had mentioned that he was playing Blue Farm today. He was trying out something a little bit differently, and I laughed because this is literally the first ever tournament I've brought Blue Farm to. So we were just entertained by the fact that neither of us had really played it before now, and then brought it to this tournament and both made the top 4 with it. This is pretty sick. And then we have Trevor here, also known as Prosperity Online, also did very well with this deck, and we're going to talk about sort of the differences between these lists and go over them from there. So Evan's list, most notably playing Boromir, definitely one of those things to a little bit better than Lavinia as far as being able to shut itself off and be able to sacrifice itself if we need free counter magic to be able to stop at a player, but definitely a good solid tempo piece for sure, being able to shut off the free interaction of your opponents when you're going for your combo turn. If you notice, Phyrexian Metamorph and Phantasmal Image available in this deck, so this list definitely being a little heavier on copy effects because they've been paying off really heavily in the format, right? We have things like Tivit and Atraxa and Kinnan and Dockside. There's so many amazing cards to copy in the format, so copying effects are really, really strong. If you notice, there is no One Ring in Freedom Waffle's list, and there's also no Talion or anything like that, so this list definitely a few lower and less engines than some of the other lists that exist right now. This one's on Mnemonic Betrayal, which I know will be a difference that we talk about from some of the other lists here, and on Snap, which is definitely one of the more aggressive tempo pieces. This is probably the most lean of the 3 lists that we're going to talk about. All of us, I think, are on 28 lands, if I'm not crazy. Yeah, this is definitely like by far the lowest mana value of any of the Blue Farm lists that we're going to talk about, being 1.22 compared to 1.44 in Trevor's list, and we'll definitely talk about that in a second, and 1.3 on mine. But yeah, Freedom Waffle coming in, continuing to perform well, now with a new deck that they're not really known for, and you know, congrats to them. And super awesome to play with them. Just want to shout them out here. Pretty cool player and super great to talk to. Now, Trevor definitely had a bit more of the spice going into this deck. Playing 3-mana Teferi here, you know, a card I've been super high on for blue farm decks, and definitely one that I think is pretty strong. Ledger Shredder, which is, I feel like, just been not played in this deck much anymore in general, which I find pretty interesting. I don't particularly love the card, but I think like you know, Tymna decks are probably the best place for it. I think just the card quality of other options right now is pretty high, and unlike other options, Ledger Shredder doesn't give you card advantage, it just gives you card filtering, which is great for breach stuff, but not anything super crazy. Another one running Phyrexian Metamorph here and Phantasmal Image, so another double clone blue farm list. I find that very interesting that both of our players here went with this choice. I put Phyrexian Metamorph in my list thinking it was kind of like a spicier option, but to see our other top 4 blue farm lists here playing these cards is pretty interesting. Trevor here also on Talion and the One Ring, so definitely heavy on the engines in this version of the deck. Smothering Tithe as well, which did come up when we played during the Swiss, not in the top 4, but this Smothering Tithe basically won Evan the game when we played during the Swiss. It was actually the second round of Swiss, and it was a 4-way blue farm mirror, which was not my favorite thing in the entire world, but it happened. The biggest spice, I think, in Evan's list here is Blasphemous Act, with, once again, Ad Nauseam still right here in this list, because it was funny, a lot of us had talked about, you know, talking about blue farm without Ad Naus, and all 3 of us ended up playing it. But to see this Ad Naus list with this 9-mana spell in it was pretty crazy. I did not see Blasphemous Act resolved in any of our games, but that was it was pretty insane to see that card being played in a deck running Ad Naus, for sure. But Born Upon the Wind is the card to talk about in Evan's version of the deck, because both of the wins I saw Evan execute with this list were using this card, and it was used with such amazing proficiency. In our game that I was talking about where we played, Evan's Smothering Tithe was wheeled into, and he was able to Ad Naus, hit Born Upon the Wind, and win on top of the end step of someone's turn going into the next player, which was pretty sick and also devastating for us. I also watched as Evan was able to cast Born Upon the Wind to be able to start comboing on top of someone's entire turn. Was able to, a Dockside combo was literally on the stack, and he was able to Chain of Vapor his own Dockside in the battlefield, flash it in, and between copies of the Chain of Vapor was able to bounce different things and put them all back in his hand and win with Oracle on top of someone else's win. So that part was pretty sick, and it definitely convinced me. It was already a card I was thinking very heavily about to be playing in Blue Farm, and it's probably just gonna make it in that deck. It's insane. Smothering Tithe was another one I was actually thinking about as well, just, you know, trying to avoid super aggressively loading up on 4-drops, but Evan with this version list, not caring, just going for a lot of these big payoffs with this blue farm deck, and making it to the top 4. Definitely was a scary player to play against, played super well throughout the tournament, and super big shout out to them. And yeah, here's my blue farm list, and as I said, was able to take down this tournament, which is pretty sick. The first time I've ever played blue farm at a tournament. I just kind of wanted to check it off my bucket list as a cEDH player, and it turned out pretty well. I think my biggest innovation for the archetype was, and not even innovation because it was something played, I guess, a long time ago, but I was playing Displacer Kitten combos with this version of the deck, and it did win me multiple games. Not the final match, but definitely did win me multiple games during the Swiss. But just the ability to resolve a 3-mana Teferi and then get your Kitten and play any non-creature to be able to start your combo off was just so strong. Teferi was already a card that I wanted to play in my deck, right? It was very clearly a card that deserved an inclusion in this list. So to me, it was just very free to be able to put Kitten in there and then, use Metamorph and some other cards with ETBs to be able to really pay off and get value off of that. Obviously, having Displacer Kitten and Dockside was super strong. I didn't get to assemble that during the Swiss or the Metamorph combos, but what I did get to assemble was just Teferi resolving. I resolve a tutor and then I win the game. So I was actually really, really impressed by Kitten combos in Blue Farm. It was like everything I expected them to be. I definitely noticed, and you noticed by the players who did well with Blue Farm at this tournament were playing it in the way that was kind of pitched by Brian Koval when he was doing well with this list, which is you just play it like a mid-range deck. In certain situations, you can take advantage of other decks not being responsible with interaction, and you can go for your Ad Naus. But apart from that, you're trying to land early advantage engines. You're trying to get your Esper Sentinels, your Tymnas, all of those things, and you're trying to wait and bide your time and go off when your other opponents are just out of resources. And I think think that's genuinely the way this deck is supposed to be played. I mean, you have these two very inherently powerful card advantage engines in the command zone, and I think that's just the way to play the deck. It's like it has these more explosive options. But I mean, in my list, I'm not running Culling Week. I'm not, you know, I barely wanted to run Cabal Ritual in the deck, but the deck is really just attempting to be this sort of tempo deck in cEDH. I chose not to run the One Ring. I was having a lot of trouble finding cuts, and you know, where some of the other lists had an extra force drop available, I was playing Displacer Kitten, right? So basically I wanted to find a spot for the One Ring and Talion without like over committing to higher mana value cards. So what that ended up being was I didn't actually think the One Ring was going to be great in this deck. I feel like the ability to create a creature and have that combined with the inherent synergy of having Tymna in the command zone. So for me, I was like, yeah, Talion's a snap include, and then the One Ring I kept to the side. You know, before this tournament, I was experimenting with a noseless version of the deck. I was looking at cards like Sheoldred and the One Ring and stuff like that. But I ended up liking this version because it just felt cleaner when I was doing playtesting with it. So very happy with the deck. Obviously was able to, you know, take down the whole tournament with it, and it felt really, really smooth. I'm a huge fan of the kitten lines in the list. I think it was really, really solid, and more people were expecting it than I was kind of surprised by. When I had 3 minutes of Fairy down, even though it's not like a common play pattern, people would call out that like we had to look out for kitten. And I was like, wow, you guys are expecting me to play kitten in this deck? So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, the deck performed really, really well. The other interesting inclusion that the other players on Blue Farm were not on was I'm on the Cavern of Souls tech. I think Brian Koval did a lot of work exploring this archetype and talking about how powerful Cavern of Souls can be. And I think, you know, just having Cavern of Souls, being able to have an uncounterable Grand Abolisher come down is just so incomparable. I mean, the same thing with a Ranger Captain of Eos, right? And then being able to protect our other value pieces, right? Cards that will often be countered, like Draenith and Opposition Agent and stuff like that. These cards do eat a lot of interaction, and you know, I definitely know that like Esper Sentinel and Sarah Sentinel were able to come down on that Cavern as well. So we play enough humans combined with the fact that it's just a super strong synergy, and we don't really lose out by having it. I think I had one situation where I was like, man, I wish this Cavern of Souls tapped for any color, but even then it was like a very minimal situation, and it didn't like affect my game or cause me to lose or anything like that. So all in all, I just want to once again thank the guys from Crimson Lion Games. If you're in the Texas area, if you're anywhere near there, go check them out. The tournament they ran was really good. They did a great job running it, and I will definitely be going back next year when they have another one of these tournaments. It was a really awesome time, and everyone who worked at the store was super nice. So it was a really awesome experience. Yeah, so definitely come check them out. If you're not in the Texas area, check out the next one that supposedly they'll be running next year. And I'm interested to see what things from these like rules that they keep the same, what they change, whether the, you know, kills continue to be worth a point and taking a point away from the winning player, or if it's going to be something a little bit different. But as I said, it was really nice to see like just drawing into the top 16. People were out there fighting until the very last round of Swiss, and it was pretty sweet. And yeah, so it feels great to have another tournament win under the belt, and thank you all for watching this video. Remember, if you like this, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and check me out at patreon.com/comedianmtg, where you can get amazing perks. We have a coaching tier. We have people who vote on monthly brews, things like that. All of those things can be found on the Patreon, and they help to keep this channel going, and I owe it all to my patrons. And if you're out there watching, you're a patron of this channel, thank you so very much. Y'all are the reason I can do this. Thank you. Catch y'all next time. Peace.